Hello, Jamie, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're really thrilled to have you as part of this conversation, and we think there's a lot for us to discuss about the new presidency. I think what's going to be unique about this interview is that we're really probably the only organization that is looking at President Biden's record as it affects reproductive rights and sexual health and justice. I think there are a lot of issues, pressing issues, that the president is being asked to address. I think there's been a lot of damage done the last couple of years that the president is being asked to roll back. But we want to make sure that the issues of reproductive freedom do not get overlooked in all of this, as so often been the case in the past. So, with that setup, I wanted to take you back to January 20th, also known as Inauguration Day, and just ask you from an emotional perspective to reflect on what you were thinking and feeling when you saw President Biden being sworn in, a new administration change. As you thought about what that could mean on these issues, what were your feelings?
I think my first feeling was actually the emotion came seeing Kamala Harris get
Mhm.
inaugurated. I come from a church where women are not allowed to lead, women are not allowed to be priests. And that has profound global ramifications on women and their disproportionate suffering. So to see Kamala be just steps from the presidency and to be in that position, I think that's where the emotion came from. Knowing that President Biden supports women and supports women's leadership also is profoundly emotional, especially since he himself is Catholic. Uh, Other than that, I would say there were, I think, the obvious feelings of relief that this 4 year experience of being almost like an alternate universe with the former president had come to an end, and almost dealing with the shock that it was really over
Mm.
was very, very powerful.
Has it sunk in yet that it's really over?
When your steps from Capitol Hill, it's sometimes it's a little unnerving. I have to say, and there's I think that that sense of threat is still looming. Certainly, we had another incident on Friday, and that just stirred up all that pain. But I think that yes, I'm finally starting to trust that we have some stability and some maturity, and someone who really is committed to human rights in
Yeah.
office.
Yeah. Can you talk about what it's been like the last 4 years in
Mhm.
seeing different religious groups actually stand with President Trump
Yeah.
despite positions that seem to clearly come into conflict with key religious values?
I can speak to that particularly as a Catholic, where Catholic teaching is very clear about certain issues that President Trump clearly had no respect for. One of them is care for the immigrant and care for the vulnerable. The other one is the Catholic Church is fundamentally opposed to the death penalty. So to watch him just flagrantly disregard those teachings, all the while watching the US bishops tacitly still support Trump was absolutely devastating, honestly. And I think that for me, I think it was the March for Life that was the second or third year of Trump's presidency when he actually spoke at the March for Life. That really, to me, put everything into perspective because it showed me that the bishops are not concerned about the unborn. They're not concerned about the vulnerable. They're really not concerned about the sacredness of life, that this was purely a political move fueled by their fear of women's power and their fear of women having control over their own fertility. So that was a stunning moment for me, in particular, watching Trump speak at the March for Life and be applauded by US bishops, given all of his other radical disregard for life.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that moment. How do you reconcile that show of tacit support, with what, anyone who has been raised Catholic has been taught to believe and to stand for? How do you imagine that being explained on Sundays?
I don't think you can. I think that what probably many priests did on those Sundays when they were giving homilies was to just return it to President Trump being the most pro-life president in history. And why is that? Because the US bishops said that this was the preeminent issue, that being anti choice was the preeminent issue. It was superior to all other issues. And that is why they supported Trump, they said. But it shows this profound dishonesty about how they really feel about life because Trump had such disregard for human life. It was agony. And it's very painful having watched the church for the last 20 years go through this terrible phase of reckoning with its protection of sexual abusers. And then to see it, go into throw its support behind Trump, it just questions their fidelity to any of their teachings.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's switch gears now to the current
Sure,
president,
of course.
who is a proud and consistent professor
Yeah,
of being a man of faith, who talks a
yeah.
lot about the impact his religion has on him, and really leads in a lot of conversations with, with who he is as a Catholic.
Yes.
First, talk to me about just very generally what it means to have a Catholic president, for someone like you, who's the head of an organization called Catholics for Choice.
Well, I think what's significant is Biden is the first unequivocally pro-choice Catholic president. And that's even more significant
Mm.
than just having a Catholic president. And it's significant for us because we know that the majority of Catholics in the United States do support abortion rights and do
Can you
think it
say
should
that
be
one more
legal.
time? Because I don't feel like
Yes.
we hear that often enough. I think so often, one of
Yes,
the challenges or frustrations that we have at Rewire News Group as journalists is,
sure.
in reporting the facts. And the facts is that abortion is not a polarizing issue in
Yes.
this country. Nearly 70% of Americans believe that abortion should be legal. And
Yes.
even when we start to look at different faiths, we find similar findings. So I would love for you to say that again.
Absolutely. The majority of Catholics believe in abortion rights, believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. And even more than that, 68% do not want to see Roe fall. We know that pregnant people get abortions at the same rate. Pregnant Catholics get abortions at the same rate as everybody else. So the way in which the bishops make this polarizing issue, or even the media turns it into that, just is not a reflection of the reality on the ground in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to have President Biden
Yeah.
actually standing with what most folks believe, significant, certainly, just as a symbol, but talk to me about how it's significant as more than a symbol.
Well, Biden is one of the first presidents in a long time that actually is a practicing person of faith. Not only is he Catholic, he goes to Mass at least every Sunday, sometimes even more frequently than that. He has referred to his faith very regularly to support why he fights for justice, for human rights, that is all grounded in his faith and in the unique Catholic social justice teaching of our tradition. So it's quite significant because it's not just an identity or a cultural phenomenon for him. It's very much who he is as a person of faith,
Yeah.
his Catholicism.
And he's been on a bit of a journey, I think, with his
Mm,
relationship and his position on abortion,
yeah,
to become someone who stands unequivocally um, in defending a pregnant person's right to choose. Can you talk a little bit about that journey? Because I think it
yeah.
mirrors in so many ways the journeys that a lot of folks go through, Catholics or not. This is a decision that a lot of folks do spend time thinking about and seeing as a reflection of their moral system, their value system. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you make of his journey and how he got to this place.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not inside his heart or his mind, but there is for him a fundamental belief in human dignity and in social justice, and that comes from his Catholic training. It comes from schooling, from his theology classes. from perhaps homilies he heard in more progressive Catholic churches. We have this fundamental belief as Catholics in the preferential option for the poor, which means
Mhm.
that the poor, the vulnerable, the marginalized should be our first priority. Those are the people we need to not only take care of first, but give the best of the best. And I think that's reflected, it's certainly reflected in how he has dealt with other controversial issues, such as same sex marriage, such as transgender rights, uh, contraceptive access. These are all things that are also in violation of Catholic teaching, but he realizes that there's a deeper issue of human dignity and social justice at work here.
Mhm.
Um, Similarly, his fight for violence against women. I think he understands that at the core, this is about women not being equal to men, that people of all genders not being considered equal. And that's why women suffer disproportionately because we're not seen as fully human. And I think that that's a really important marker for his journey too, is VAWA. So I would say, he's led through his commitment to justice, and I think we're seeing that now in even his first 100 days. He's made some very good policy moves on reproductive rights.
So let's talk about some of those policy moves because, of
Sure.
course, we are evaluating his first 100 days. As you think about some of the actions he's taken while he's been in office, are there two or three that stand out where you kind of thought, okay, this was a good move. We're starting to see progress. This is the kind of action I want to see him take.
Yeah, I think we all got a little bit nervous when on day one he didn't rescind the global gag rule. We all got worried. So it was good that finally to see him do that. Certainly, having Javier Becerra as our Health and Human Services cabinet member is a very big deal. Becerra is a Catholic, and he has one of the best records on pro-choice policies and reproductive rights policies. Uh, Funding the population, resuming funding of the UN Population Fund was huge. So these were all really good
Mhm.
markers. He has a way to go, as you say. He's on a journey. He's still on the Roe anniversary. He did put out a very good document reflecting on Roe, but not saying the word abortion. I don't think we've heard him say the word abortion. So that's something we're looking for on the next step of his journey.
Well, let's talk about that because that is certainly
Sure.
something we have noticed. And one of
Yeah.
the questions that I'm putting out there is, what do you think it's going to take to get him to say the word abortion? Is it Kamala whispering in his ear and saying, Joe, you really need to do this at this point? Because,
Right.
she, of course, is, out there, very fiercely talking about the importance of abortion, as part of overall reproductive health policy. So, what do you think it's going to take for him to get to that place?
Well, I think that certainly we have been talking to the White House at Catholics for Choice because we have this unique perspective as Catholics, and we surmise that he's a Catholic from a certain generation, and that could have a lot to do with his reticence. It doesn't help that the U.S. bishops make it into this taboo topic that subjects people to terrible punishments if they disagree.
Mm.
The moment Biden was elected, we get back to that conversation about denying him communion. But what I'd like to say to Biden, if I had the chance, and certainly what we've been saying to his aides, is that it does not help anyone to keep reinforcing the stigma of abortion. No one is served by this. That is what the bishops want. The bishops want us to make it taboo, a black and white issue, not to be discussed. Now, that's not true to the Catholic tradition. We actually have a very rich intellectual tradition,
Mm.
and it is an opportunity for dialogue. So I think that hopefully there will be enough pressure from Catholics and from other people of faith. Explaining to him how important it is to destigmatize. And if he says it as a practicing Catholic, he says the word abortion and supports abortion rights, it will really be transformative.
Well, we can only hope that it will come soon.
Yes,
Maybe day
yes,
101.
yes.
It's so interesting thinking about this journey that he's been on, that many people of faith are on, because one of the things that we've seen at Rewire News Group is that many folks come to us through Google search with questions around things like, what does the Bible say about abortion?
Right.
how can I be a good Catholic or a good person of faith and still support abortion? I mean, this is clearly, something that folks do try to reconcile. And we're very
Yes.
encouraged that folks are wanting to have those conversations and are wanting to understand. So, as someone in the position that you're in, with a president who has such a huge moment potentially to seize, what would you tell folks who are just starting those journeys or trying to puzzle it out, especially when, as you point out, there are real threats coming at them, that they will
Yeah.
be denied communion, that there will be
Yes.
consequences.
Yeah.
How do folks start to embrace this larger idea of this is part of human rights and social justice?
Well, it goes back to really the Catholic social justice teaching. And one thing we like to point out, first of all, what we like to say is for Catholics and for a lot of people of faith, abortion is a morally complex issue, and that's
Hmm.
okay. And that's a very good starting
Yeah.
point because what we're trying to do is enter into dialogue to honor that Catholic intellectual tradition of using our reason and using our conscience to discern morally complex issues. So that's the first thing I would say. The problem with the bishops is they just want to shut it down as absolute taboo, no communication. So just in the fact that people are trying to have a conversation and the bishops aren't allowing them means that we have to create that space for them. Going back to our social justice tradition, again, abortion rights, reproductive rights, access to contraception disproportionately impacts people of color, the poor, people in profound states of powerless, people in refugee camps. So those are the people who need the health care most so often. And those are the people that we are called to give the best possible care to. And so this is part of honoring their dignity and honoring their human rights is to allow them control over their bodies, to give them that freedom that they deserve. When it comes to family planning, poor families need, in order to survive, in order to feed and educate their children, they need to be able to decide the timing and the number of births that they have as families. This is about responsible parenthood. This is about fostering healthy families that have access to all the good things that they deserve. So that's the justice component of it as
Hmm.
well. And then we have
Hmm.
the conscience component. As Catholics, we believe in the primacy of conscience. We believe God endows each one of us with human reason. And so that our conscience really should be, according to Catholic teaching, this is on the books now. Our individual conscience is the final arbiter in all moral decision making. So we have to honor that as Catholics too.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think, in hearing about the disproportionate effect on different communities, of
Mm,
course, as you've mentioned several times, women are the most profoundly affected by
yes.
these policies. And talk to me a little bit about where you hope to see Kamala stepping in, our vice president, who has been such a
Right.
champion of women and who has been a
Yes.
fighter for these issues throughout her career. You talked about she being the one who really filled you with hope on Inauguration
Yes.
Day. What are your expectations from her?
I think to really fight for true equality for women and for people of diverse genders. As a woman of color, she brings another level of power to this because you have a double disadvantage that she has dealt with. And just to show the profound ramifications of on society when women do not have equality. This is an argument I make all the time. One of my other big issues, other than repro, is getting women ordained priests in the Catholic Church. Why? Well, because yes, I want women to be priests because they're great and they would be phenomenal priests. But more than that, when you have institutions like the United States, like the Catholic Church, which is so profoundly globally influential, when you can show that women are truly equal to men, it has a transformative effect on dismantling the structures of why women suffer disproportionately from violence, from poverty, from lack of education, from trafficking. All of those things at their root are based on sexism because men have the belief that women are not equal to them and believe that they can treat them in these ways and that they should suffer. And people of color, of course, similarly have that. Our horrible centuries of racism, suggesting that the black body is not worth what the white body is, and that white bodies are just more important. And so that that somehow black suffering is less important or of less value. These are very similar, interweavings of sexism and of racism. And I think that having her in this position of incredible power, because I think power is a good thing and women should have power and people of color should have power. So to see her in power is just will change everything, particularly for new generations.
Ah, I hope you're right. I hope you're
Me
right.
too.
Um, we've talked a lot about, what's been happening at the federal level. I want to take a moment to look at what's been happening at the state level,
Sure.
because there has been just this has been the most active legislative session at the state level in terms of, bills being introduced and
Yes.
passed
Yes.
to limit access to abortion and other forms of reproductive health care. In fact, the Guttmacher Institute did an analysis that said that 6 in 10 women of reproductive age actually live in states where the policy landscape is incredibly prohibitive
Yeah.
to ending pregnancy. So
Yeah.
while we have Roe versus Wade at the federal level, at the state level, having it be legal does not mean that you have access to that care. And given the flurry of activity, very alarming activity we've seen at the state level, is there something that you would like to see President Biden step up and do about this? Knowing that he's limited in what he can do, around state law, but is this a moment
Yes.
for him to be more prominently speaking out?
Yeah, I think one of the things he can do is urge Congress to repeal the Hyde Amendment. There are only 16 states where people can get abortions through the Medicaid program. So that would, I think, have a huge impact. Again, because we have a situation where it's the poorest, it's the most vulnerable, it's people of color, it's LGBTQ people who are getting disadvantaged by this. People who are white, people with money can travel to other states, can get medication abortion, but it's those folks who are rural, who are in positions of powerless, who are most deeply disadvantaged. And he can use his commitment to justice and human dignity in that. But it's scary because the tragedy is people are getting in these states, anti-choice people are getting excited because they see the court. And the court has this insane imbalance of radical right-wing Catholics in the
Supreme Court,
majority.
just to be clear,
Supreme Court,
yes,
yes, the Supreme. Yeah,
yes,
there are many courts in the United
yes,
States.
many of
Uh,
which are in a similar composition, yes.
exactly. So we have, yes, exactly. So we have this disproportionate number of right wing. I mean, these aren't even moderate Catholics. These are right wing Catholics who they are just so excited about that are going to, finally strike down Roe. And so it's troubling that's why we're seeing this flurry of activity right now in the states.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel
Yeah,
like there should be a law against passing laws that are unconstitutional just because you want to challenge them all the way up to the Supreme Court.
exactly.
Talk about just the millions of dollars wasted
Yes.
on those kinds of efforts.
Yes.
Another effort that we're seeing really picking up steam in an alarming way are the attacks on trans youth.
Yes.
This suddenly seems to be the
Mm.
new,
Hmm.
issue that certain right wingers are seizing on as a
Yeah.
way of, somehow further dividing the country and
Yes.
making us seem more polarized than we are. Because again, all of the research shows that most folks are incredibly supportive of trans youth and,
Yes.
do not have any concerns around trans youth in
Hmm.
sports and all of the other things that
Hmm.
are being thrown up in the air right
Hmm.
now. So
Hmm.
talk to me a little bit about, where you would like to see the Biden administration taking action to protect um, trans youth.
Yeah, it's another case again, as we see this flurry of activity in states. I think there's 60 bills right now, anti-trans bills at play throughout the country. I think that, Biden has been outstanding always for on LGBTQ issues, and he's very, very aware of trans issues. I think in a special way because this is a particularly vulnerable community. Uh, it's very, very sad because this has become the new movement. I think when right-wing Christian and Catholic groups realized they lost the marriage equality fight, this became where they put the crosshairs was on trans people. And I think the reason that they're so fundamentally threatening in their mind is it has to do with gender. It has to do with throwing off these rigid gender roles that Christian and Catholic right wing have this radical commitment to. They just want to support only a deeply patriarchal society, and trans people uh, call all of ask by their very lives question some of our presuppositions about sex and about gender and about roles, and they should be embraced for what they are bringing to us, what they are the structures of injustice that they're dismantling by their lives. And so it's so unfortunate that they are the most vulnerable in their drive to be authentic and to be courageous. And I think President Biden sees that, and I think that there's a lot of hope in the Equality Act, which he's certainly been a very, very big supporter of. But again, it's a case just not unlike abortion, where we need education, where I think that there's just some fundamental misunderstandings of what these issues are and what they mean and what the human toll is.
Yeah. And yet, even with education, when you think about, someone who's grown up Catholic, going to church every Sunday, hearing that we are supposed to be living in a patriarchal society, the
Yes,
church itself is patriarchal. How do you
yes,
start to push back against that
yeah,
messaging, which is very deep rooted for folks who do grow up in faith? I'm sure you've had a similar experience. How do
sure.
you start to say, like, no, we do need to challenge the patriarchy, because that
Yeah.
means in some cases feeling like you're going up against your faith.
I think that if the church was much more honest about what they're teaching, people would start to see through it. Instead
Mm,
they take these one issue, they take the abortion issue, or they take this issue or trans issue. And I think what I would love people to see is that this is about the Catholic Church is the most radical patriarchy on the planet. Not only do we have only an all male leadership structure, these all of these men have no access to women at all, uh, as wives, as daughters, because they're all supposedly, ostensibly, celibate. And so, to really look at this, these are all ramifications of a system that says that only men can be leaders, only men can take initiative, only men deserve authority, and that everyone else needs to be in a subservient role. Women, that what the Catholic Church teaches ultimately, and I wish people could see this, is, and when I tell people this, they get riled up, is women's most essential vocation is motherhood, that is what we are supposed to be. And Catholics talk about women having a special role. They have a feminine genius. Catholic teaching says, what is it, feminine genius? It's actually the womb. It's actually the uterus, because that is our genius, that we are able to gestate and give birth. And so I think that, when you start with getting to the crux of what is the fundamental thinking that leads to all of these issues. We saw the church again say we won't bless same-sex couples. That's all rooted in this idea of rigid gender roles.
yeah.
So I'll keep returning to that and say, hey, women, transgender people, gay, lesbian people, we're all fighting the same fundamental ideology in religion. Let's fight together.
And it certainly seems like right now is a real moment to fight, because we have an administration that's supportive of these issues. And there's also a bit of urgency as well. There are many folks who do not believe that Democrats will hold on to power at the midterm elections. So folks
Yes,
have been talking about this 2-year window. Folks have been
yes,
pushing President Biden to be bold and to take as many actions as possible to advance the Democratic platform.
yes,
But I do wonder if there's a risk of pushing him too far too soon, or
right.
asking him to do too much. You're in conversation with his
Hmm.
aides. You have
Hmm.
some sense of, all of the many asks being made of him right now.
Yes.
Do you have a sense that there's only so far we're going to be able to push? Do you have a sense that folks may be disappointed and may need to be more patient than they would have hoped, or are you feeling like the president is all in, and 2 years from now the world's going to look radically different?
I do, again, from the Catholic perspective, I do worry about who he feels he needs to show his gratitude to, be in allegiance with, because the funny thing about progressive Catholics is that they are wonderful on issues related to immigration, the poor, the death penalty, a host of justice issues. But even for progressive Catholics, abortion remains quite taboo. And in fact, if you remember the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, over the summer, there was a nun speaking. There was a priest who prayed for life, unborn life in the womb. So clearly, Biden is signaling to the progressive Catholics who feel a bit icky about abortion, "Hey, I'm still your guy." And so I do worry that he's going to be continue to be reticent because he feels like he still needs that Catholic vote, because the Catholic vote is consequential and it is pivotal, for better or worse. So that's my concern, and that I think some folks are concerned, and I've heard this, that if we push too far, particularly on abortion, he may put off people of faith who are progressive but still uncertain about abortion. So I think we're going to have to be patient, but all the while, people like me need to be educating Biden and other progressive Catholics about this issue.
Yeah. So, as you reflect on his 100 days as a whole, if you were to give him a grade, this is something we're asking all
Right.
the interviewees in this series. If you were to grade him, is he? It sounds like maybe he's a B, B minus. Where would
B,
you put him?
yes,
B, a solid
yes. I
B.
think a solid B, B minus. Yeah, he's on the edge. Let's see how his next paper is, and we'll see, what the curve is. I think so. I think so. I mean, he has had to juggle so many priorities. I mean, he inherited so many messes, whether it's at the border, whether it's the economy, and of course, COVID. I mean, we're still in the throes of a pandemic, and we have this new level of divisiveness and polarization that has gotten turned to violence, in the Capitol. So I try to be, sensitive about that. But I do think he has a ways to go with reproductive rights, and I would love for him to see this not only as an issue of justice, but an issue of women's freedom, because when women have access, reproductive freedom, they get access to all different sorts of power and opportunity. And I know that's what he wants for women.
Yeah.
And so that's my hope, is that he can start to see the reproductive rights fight as an issue of justice, as an issue of greater freedom and empowerment of women.
Yeah.
And then I think he may get to a B plus.
That was going to be my question. What does he need to do to improve his grade? So really kind of continue on
Yes.
his journey. What would make
Yeah.
you flunk him outright?
Make me a what? I'm sorry, missed the
Flunk
word.
him.
Oh, flunk.
What would push him down to like the D or F level?
Yeah, I think that if he begins to make compromises with, with Catholics, that will ultimately harm women, harm people of gender diverse people, and harm the most vulnerable. You really can't. I hope he understands that you really can't compromise with Catholic bishops.
Mm.
There is no room for dialogue and there's no room for compromise. So I hope he doesn't feel that he needs to do that, because if he does, yeah, he gets an F from me, because too many people will suffer.
Fantastic. Well, I think that is a great note to end on. Although I do always like to ask, is there anything that you wanted to mention or discuss that I didn't ask you about?
Let me think. I think there was one point I think I was making about family planning.
Yeah.
And something that Biden did really well, is that he is directing funds now. He's obviously refunding the population fund, but getting more money into international family planning, because that's really what's going to lift people out of poverty and out of vulnerability. And our friends at Guttmacher and we agree with this, are calling on him to triple the amount of funding for international family planning. I think right now it's about 575 million. We'd love to see him bring that to 1.6 million. And again, because that is what gets people out of poverty, that's what
Mhm.
gets women access to freedom and power. That's what achieves all of the things that we want to achieve globally, particularly for the most vulnerable.
And how optimistic are you at seeing that triple?
I'm just happy to see some funding being returned, because things were getting pretty frightening there
Yeah.
with Trump, and international religious liberty claims that were starting to be made, and Pompeo was such a strange, kind of diabolical force, to be quite honest with you. So I'm happy to see some funding going that way, but I'm going to remain optimistic that it gets tripled. And we also, in addition, this connects. We really need him to support the Global Her Act very, very much. We cannot keep having the lives of the most vulnerable globally be at the whim and vulnerable to the whim of a flick of a pen every time there's a new president. This is a massive, massive life or death issue, the global gag rule. People live or die, people suffer and suffer unto death because of this policy. And it needs to end once or for all. So we are hoping he will just come out and full throated support of the Global Her Act.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as Americans, we don't even fully understand the impact of these
Yes,
decisions. We actually
yes,
at Rewire led a roundtable discussion last month with a bunch of global activists,
yeah,
and they all talked about how US policy, to your point, from day to day,
yes,
can completely upend their programs, the care
yes,
they're able to provide, and they are unable to explain to their patients who come
yes.
seeking help why suddenly yesterday they could do this and today they
Hmm.
couldn't. And oh, what? Because the US changed its mind. And it's really,
Exactly.
the ramifications, as you mentioned, are really catastrophic. And I
Yes,
don't think it's something that we talk about enough or pay attention to enough,
yes,
because it's something we think of happening overseas, but we are the
exactly.
ones who are really controlling that, with devastating consequences a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
And as a Catholic with a preferential option for the poor, there could not be something more relevant for Biden than supporting the Global Her Act.
Well, I'm going to be interested to check back in with
Thank
you. I
you.
don't know, in 6 months, a year, and see
Yes,
how he's doing in your estimation. But I certainly
me
hope
too.
that there will be progress to report. So, thank you
Thank
for
you.
taking the time to speak to us. A huge part of our audience, like I said, is searching their
Mhm.
conscience on these issues, which are morally complex, and
Yes.
we want to make sure that we are giving them the information they need as they are on that journey. So thank you for being an important voice in this story.